It's go time.
The season is underway. Woohoo! Welcome everyone to Third Down Gamble. I'm Don Charbonne with Heath Graham. We have football back, and I'm so excited, and boy, lots to talk about already coming out of week one.
There certainly is. It was great to have product back on the field. Some very, very entertaining games. Some surprises in there, and all in all, a very fun first week of football.
Let's go to opening night. We've got to talk about the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Is it time? I know we're at 1 of 18, but is it time now to panic if you're the Blue Bombers? I can imagine that there are people in Winnipeg that are ready to fire everybody in sight.
Oh, there certainly are. There's fans that want to see heads roll after week one, for sure. My thought on this is it was a bit of a surprising loss, but there was a lot of mistakes out there that can be cleaned up, and this team can get back on track. Now, week two for me is going to be the telltale. How do they respond? How do they bounce back? If they put up a big fight and blow Ottawa out of the water, I don't think there's any reason to panic. If it's a close game, it may be a little bit of a concern, and certainly if Ottawa wins, then you start to think what is going wrong with the Blue Bombers.
Winnipeg had last lost a home opener in 2018, and that was against Edmonton, and they lost 33-30 that night. What happened in 2018? The Bombers did not go to the Grey Cup. The last time they lost to an Eastern club in their home opener was 2016, that being the Montreal Alouettes. The Alouettes came in as massive underdogs and took it to the Blue Bombers. Two statements being made out of that in my way of thinking. One is the Alouettes were no fluke. That what we did to you last year in Hamilton to win the Grey Cup, that was us. Part two of the equation, it does raise concerns for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, not only because they looked flat doing what they did on the field that night. The other problem is, and we talked to Derek Taylor, we've talked to amongst ourselves, how is it that you overcome age? Zach Collaros did not look good throwing the deep ball. He couldn't hit a deep target, and he was picked off in the end zone as a result of it when he was looking for Dalton Schoen. That is a concern, and part and parcel of all of this, and I want to know from you, so many of these starters were benched for the preseason, benched for part of training camp to give them rest because they know what they're supposed to be doing. Did that backfire?
I believe it did. I think that's part of why they came out flat. You can practice as much as you want, but not getting meaningful snaps even in a preseason game, you don't get that flow. You've got a defense, if we're talking Zach Collaros and the offense, you're lining up against the same Bombers defense day after day in practice. You know what they're bringing to the table. Even getting some preseason action gives you a different look and a different defense. They did not have that, and I believe that was part of the problem that gave them fits. The other part of it is on defense. There's some rookie defensive backs in Ford and Bond on the corners. Mistakes are going to be made, but the thing that impressed me with those guys is the closing speed, especially Terrell Ford. He is probably one of the 3 or 4 quickest defensive backs in the league right now. That showed, and as he grows into the CFL game, he's going to be a very dangerous corner, but there is going to be a learning curve, and don't be surprised if he gets beat on some big plays early in the season.
If he's going to be fast, and you want to consider him one of the elite in terms of speed, there's a guy that played against him that night, Antoine Ducroix, who has done it in spades in the last 2 years with interceptions that have gone 100-plus yards for touchdowns. If Winnipeg is going to bounce back, you talk about coming into Ottawa and making a statement. There was so much discussion going into this football game that Winnipeg had revenge on their minds, that this was going to be a chance to avenge what happened in the Grey Cup last November. Correct me if I'm wrong, but one thing that Mike O'Shea is not is a massive motivator. He's not a rah-rah guy. He expects you to be self-motivating. I didn't believe that the Blue Bombers would have that kind of team energy to come out in the field as if they've been wronged last November and they were going to set it right. O'Shea isn't about that. He's about discipline, about preparation, and so he would be almost a calming influence on that temperament.
He is, and one of the big mottos with Mike O'Shea is we want to go 1-0 this week. He's not a big guy on dwelling in the past or looking too far ahead in the future. He wants to focus on what's happening this week. And as I mentioned earlier, there was some mistakes out there that the Bombers made. Kenny Lawler dropping a ball in the end zone, Nick Dembski getting stripped, Sergio Castillo had a very rough night kicking the ball. All of those things can be cleaned up, and that can change the result of the game pretty quickly. If a few of those plays go the other way, we talk about football games being the difference in 3 or 4 plays, and there was a few plays that night on Bombers offense and a couple on defense that had they gone the other way, you're looking at a different outcome.
On most nights, I would agree with you. I don't know on this night that was going to change anything. The 4 or 5 plays had to be 9 or 10. Winnipeg didn't look right. Montreal never felt threatened, and Montreal made a few mistakes themselves. Let's get into this whole business of field goal kicking and the chip in the ball. The CFL had to backtrack on it and say, look, if you don't want to use it when you're kicking, fine, use the regular ball that you would normally use. From my understanding, the USFL, the UFL never employed the chip into the football that was used for field goals. What is it, less than half an ounce, which is how many grams? Not many. Is it going to make that much difference? Or is it, as Will Wheaton said to a certain Sheldon Cooper, I'm living inside your head?
It's hard to say. I'm not a kicker. I can't speak for them. I know it's very much a mental game as much as it is a physical game for kickers. Sergio Castillo nailed 50-plus yarders in the preseason, so I don't think it's a concern of his accuracy. Something was off opening night, and if he's going to chalk it up to having the microchipped ball, he better go 4 for 4 against Ottawa and not miss a convert. They're giving him a viable excuse to why he struggled. We certainly saw with the change happen very quickly after one game. The rest of the games had the option, and we saw Rennie Paredes nail every single kick. It's a remarkable night of consistency. We didn't see that from Castillo in the first game. It's something to watch the rest of the way out here and see how it plays out.
Brett Lowther was quick to jump on board with Castillo and support him, and the CFL in response said, fine. The whole point of this is to measure not the speed of the kick, not the distance traveled, because you can figure that out with triangulation regardless. If it's missed and the returner is carrying the ball out of the end zone, the CFL was trying to codify impacts. So, for instance, if the ball is decelerated slowly, does that happen on most missed field goal opportunities, which would mean a tackle that was less impactful on the returner and the tackler? Or is it a case where the ball is decelerated abruptly? In other words, you crash into somebody. Does that happen more often? And they're trying to bring some sort of sense to injuries. Where do they occur? Why do they occur? And what are the factors that are involved with them? This is the reason why they wanted these chips in the ball, not to worry about field goal kicking. And they did a whole bunch of tests prior to the season. Granted, it was with a robot, but if the robot can figure it out, I'm sure a human could. It was to determine parts of the game that traditionally have been viewed as more violent. Is it so?
You have to really be careful of how you implement new technology and how it affects the play of the game. And one thing that this reminds me of, not to the same degree, but when Fox got the NHL broadcast rights in the US, they tried to put a chip in the puck to make it traceable and easier for viewers to pick up. Those pucks were a disaster. They bounced in odd directions and did not react the way NHL players were used to the puck reacting. They got rid of them. They had to make a decision for the sake of the game to do so. Again, it's hard to determine after one game if it was really that much of an issue that affected these kickers. But the CFL has made the decision, and I think the right decision, to err on the side of caution, allow the kickers to use the ball that they're most comfortable with, and eliminate the possibility of the chip. Whether it does affect it or not, it's eliminating that possibility by allowing them to use a different ball.
I'm good with what the CFL ultimately did, given that the other leagues don't use it anyway. It's always something that you have to try it, see how it works, and if it doesn't work, which we don't know that it doesn't. I imagine that in terms of the overall mass or weight of the football, the chip itself was less than 5%, maybe even smaller than that. I can't see how that would be significantly altering the flight path of a football. Punters, from what I understand, still use it, and definitely it's used on every other play involving a quarterback, running back, anybody else. If the quarterbacks can throw it, fine. We didn't hear Zach Collaros come out after the game saying, I can't be accurate anymore because there's a chip in the football.
It doesn't take a lot, though, to change performance. And even there's movable weights in golf clubs in driver heads now that are very fractional, very, very minuscule weight differences. And it does affect the flight of the golf ball, the way that a club swings through. So again, I'm not a technical expert on it, but there are other examples of very small differences that make a difference.
Hi, this is Jamie Rydell from TSN, producer, and you're listening to the Third Down Gamble.
Let's look back at the actual football games that were played. Now, we've talked about Winnipeg, and we didn't relay any scoring from that game, but the Blue Bombers were on the short end of that score, 27-12, Montreal defeating them. We know that the Blue Bombers can and probably will rebound. The Alouettes probably feeling very assured in what they were doing and that their program is on the right track after this win.
Absolutely. The one thing that is a bit of a surprise, and I don't know if we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of this, but Sean Lemon was allowed to play, and he was a difference maker in this game. For those that are just catching up, he was suspended indefinitely due to gambling infractions. He's appealing that suspension, and because it's in an appeal state right now, he was allowed to play. He had a sack and really was a menace on that defensive line. The Alouettes defense hasn't missed a step from where they were the last 8 games of last season. They just continue to roll through. I think the breakout player for the Alouettes, and one that's going to be fun to watch on offense, is Tyson Philpott. He had a fantastic game, looks to be a dangerous receiver coming into his own in his young CFL career.
One of the things that we talked about with Derek Taylor, and he actually provided some statistical analysis of this, is the presence of Jackson Jeffcoat to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Now that he's gone, Willie Jefferson was almost a non-issue in that game. He did have a couple of opportunities where he broke through, but the Blue Bombers as a team, 1 sack. Montreal actually had 2 on the night. Willie Jefferson now can be double-teamed because they don't have to worry about what's happening on the other side anymore. And I don't think that can be undersold. Jackson Jeffcoat was massive for that defense.
He was, and is surely a big loss to not have him out there anymore. I disagree with you. I think Willie Jefferson had a fairly impactful game. He didn't get the sack numbers, but he was involved in the plays and was right there. He almost had Fajardo wrapped up. Fajardo kind of ducked him and got sacked by another player. So he made his impact. It will be something to watch this season, though, to see how much of an impact he is going to be, or whether defenses are going to be able to double team him and really take him out of commission.
Willie Jefferson didn't show up on the stat sheet, though. And if you're having an impactful game, I can see where an offensive lineman won't appear on a stat sheet, but a defensive end should be there if you're doing something special. Montreal with the win, they, of course, now have won 9 in a row, which is just a staggering stat. Moving ahead, we go to Friday, and the return of Bo Levi Mitchell to Calgary, and the only team he's never started against, the Calgary Stampeders. Here's a little piece of trivia. The very first game that Bo Levi Mitchell started for the Calgary Stampeders in 2013 at home was against the Hamilton Tiger Cats.
I thought Bo Levi Mitchell looked okay. He put up some pretty decent numbers. He was let down a little bit. Tim White had some uncharacteristic drops, as did some other receivers. On the other side, this was one of Jake Maier's better games as well, and they really took it to Hamilton and didn't allow the Tiger Cats to claw their way back. They ended up winning by 8 points, 32-24, and a little bit of a comeback in the fourth quarter for the Tiger Cats, but Calgary, especially led by that linebacking core that we talked about earlier as being probably the best in the league, they showed up big in that game.
And your Tim White, wow, did he have a bad night or what? And for the guy that could have been MOP last year, what a poor way to start. Dropped a touchdown pass. He dropped another ball that could have been setting up another touchdown. Ticats just weren't hanging on to the football in Calgary. And that just crushed them time and time and time again. You talk about 4 or 5 moments. There is your 4 or 5 in that football game. If Hamilton decides to hang on to the football, and Mitchell only missed badly on a couple of balls, the rest of them were there. If the Ticats are hanging on to that football, we might have a different result.
He threw for over 300 yards, 28 completions. It was a decent night for Bo Levi Mitchell. And yeah, absolutely, you add those 2 completions in to Tim White. Now he's completed 30 passes, probably 360 yards, and add an extra touchdown or 2 in there, and it's a different ball game.
James Butler goes off for 119 yards on 13 carries against the Stampeders. Who would have thought that the Tiger Cats would have a running game that powerful? Hamilton, with Scott Milanovich now as their head coach, I think you're going to really see this team improve in very quick measures. They gave Calgary a game. They actually were favored by odds to going into that game. Calgary at home, that's a little bit of altitude there. You've always got to factor that in. And the Stampeders did pull it out. 8 receivers caught balls for Calgary. And if you're spreading like that, that keeps defenses guessing.
That is something that has been lacking for the Tiger Cats for the last several seasons. And James Butler got a pretty hefty contract to come in, and certainly looks like he's changed the offensive strategy for the Tiger Cats. On offense for the Stampeders, Dedrick Mills looked very comfortable as the feature running back for the Stampeders. We know they had some turnover in that department. Mills was one of the 3 key running backs last season. He's going to get the bulk of the carries this year, and definitely looks like he is capable of doing so.
Tiger Cats scored 17 of their 24 points in the fourth quarter. Furious rally, came up short. Let's go to Saturday afternoon, the game that I attended, and we had every possible weather system roll through in the 3.5 hours that we were at the stadium. Good crowd on hand, which was nice to see, and the Saskatchewan Roughriders continue their winning ways in Edmonton, defeating the Elks 29-21 in a game that Edmonton dominated until the fourth quarter.
I happily had Bain as my receiver in my fantasy this week, and he came through in a big way with a couple of touchdowns. It was a massive comeback for the Riders, and something that they must feel really comfortable about. Trevor Harris had a decent game. The offensive line, which has been a problem spot for the Rough Riders in previous seasons, really stepped up and protected Trevor Harris well, gave him time to find the receivers, and that was a key in the comeback.
The Elks went into the fourth quarter leading by 10. They extended the lead to 13. Saskatchewan goes down the field. Bain gets one of his touchdowns, and then a colossal fumble at their 10-yard line, and the Riders score immediately again. And suddenly, in a game that they had been trailing for the most part, they're in the lead. And then what a crazy last minute where fumbles rule the day, and Trevor Harris makes a game-saving tackle after A.J. Ouellette fumbles the football getting close to the first down line. I can't remember the last time that Trevor Harris made a tackle, but they don't come much bigger than what he did there.
It was a great all-around effort for the Riders to come back in that one. They faced some adversity early and showed a lot of composure in getting Corey Mace his first win as a head coach. He had some great moves to avoid the Gatorade shower on the sidelines. They caught him eventually, but a big win for Mace. He's got to feel good getting that one out of the way. Next on their list, I'm sure, is to get that first home win at Mosaic.
It's a little-known fact that the majority of rookie head coaches lose their first game. So he bucks the trend there. The Rough Riders, of course, everyone was pointing out that last year they started 3-1, disappeared thereafter, but it's a different head coach this time. We move to Sunday's game, and what a thriller in Toronto. The Argonauts hang on and defeat the BC Lions 35-27 in a game that, if you want to sell CFL, that was it.
Very entertaining, and the first thing I'm going to mention is Cameron Dukes looked very comfortable taking on that starting quarterback role for the Toronto Argonauts. He did not seem out of place out there at all. We saw him sparingly last year, but a big night for him, going 21 of 27, 254 yards and 3 touchdowns. That was a big showing for Cameron Dukes.
In this podcast, I had said that this is going to be a huge stretch for the Toronto Argonauts, and how Cameron Dukes handles it was going to be really important. I kind of felt that he was going to be okay as the starting quarterback. It's just, do you get past the rookie jitters? Do you get past all the expectations that are placed upon you? And after he had that terrible fumble that led to a touchdown by BC, he settled down. The Argonauts could have went away at that moment. They had fallen behind quickly in the second quarter. The Lions were just dominating them and scored 20 points. Toronto came down the field, did something about it, and by halftime they had shortened the deficit. Interestingly, I don't think I've ever seen this before, where a team has gambled third down at their 1 yard line, and BC did it and almost got away with it.
A couple of interesting notes coming out of Toronto this week as well. Sean Oakman released by the Argonauts today. Do you see him landing somewhere else? I mean, he is a big, tall defensive lineman. Not quite sure what the issue was with the Argonauts, but is he going to get a look somewhere else?
The book on Sean Oakman, he's on the downside of the career, given his age of 32. His other sort of knock is he doesn't always perform on every play. And that's a knock against a lot of players, to be quite honest. In the Argos' way of thinking, they've got some great defensive linemen. Where was he going to fit in? Where was he going to play? He didn't see the field against BC, really. And one of the things, too, you got to remember about this, a person being released doesn't necessarily mean that the team has given up on him in an absolute sense. It means that the player may have come to the team and said, look, if you're not going to play me, let me go somewhere where I can play. You're asking where he could wind up? Right away, I think Edmonton.
Well, we talked about Winnipeg maybe missing something on their defensive line as well. If they've got money that they can find somewhere, maybe they take a look at them as well.
Another interesting point in this game, and this comes following that third down gamble that BC attempted with a minute and a half to go at their 1 yard line. Toronto gets the ball, Dukes pushes it in for a touchdown, and then the Argonauts initially decide to go for 2. At the moment, they're up by 8. They don't need 2. And it took their special teams coach to go over to the head coach, Ryan Didwiddie, and say, whoa, we don't need this. Now, ironically, maybe they would have been better served because Liram Hairolahu missed his second convert of the night on the ensuing play, and BC was still down by 8. So the game was still up for grabs as we went down to the finish. That's almost unbelievable that you can gamble at your 1 yard line, not make it, the other team scores, and you still have a chance.
Maybe Dinwiddie saw something in Hairolahu struggle earlier on, and that was the reason he wanted to go for 2. Statistically, 1 is the safer play when you're up by 8, but wow, that was a huge missed convert. And it would have really been something had Vernon Adams been able to march the Lions down the field and tie that game up.
And let's give some credit to Vernon Adams. 25 completions on 33 attempts, 363 yards. He really put on a show. The other thing that will come out of this game, and I'm certain that there's going to be a lot of questioning, Vernon Adams was left in on these short yardage plays where he was pushing the pile forward. Now, he's not a big man, and he was taking some big hits trying to get first downs on third down and short. I'm not a big fan of that. I liked what the Hamilton Tiger Cats did. Ante Milanovic-Litre comes in, a running back, takes the snap from center. He's big, he's powerful. If you're going to do this dive stuff, I thought of a better word, but then go with a running back. Teach him how to take a snap and move forward and use him.
I thought that was great as well. Thank you. I was trying to remember which team successfully pulled off the snap to the running back. Winnipeg, we saw Chris Drevler out there in short yardage situations doing what he does best as well. Teams have generally gone away from having their starting quarterback take those short yardage plunges. I don't know if BC has a right answer right now, but you certainly don't want to see situations that put Vernon Adams Jr. at risk with what he brings to the table as your number one quarterback. Let him do what he does best and try to figure out a solution for short yardage.
Third down.
Four games ahead in the Canadian Football League. We've got that Thursday through Sunday one-a-day schedule continuing. First off, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers go into Ottawa to take on the Ottawa Red Blacks. Ottawa's first game of the season. Last time Winnipeg was there, last August 2023, they lose in overtime to the Red Blacks. Dustin Crumb's coming out party.
Given what we saw from Winnipeg in week one and their struggles on offense, how can you put them as a 7.5 point favorite on the road? That doesn't make much sense to me. Ottawa has played the Bombers very close over the last several seasons. Despite their struggles in the win column, they have given Winnipeg a game pretty much every time they line up. I'm taking the Red Blacks to beat the spread in this one. I do think Winnipeg has a bounce back game and probably takes the win, but it's going to be closer than 7.5 for sure.
Kenny Lawler is out for the Blue Bombers with a broken arm. In is Adam Bighill coming back from that calf injury that he sustained last year's West Final. Bighill's addition to the defense is going to be huge. Where does Winnipeg score? Who's the guy that's going to take the lid off of that Red Blacks defense? Ottawa's defense is vastly improved. I just don't see how Winnipeg is going to do anything spectacular unless turnovers really make it happen for them. A 7.5 point spread, Ottawa should be able to beat that. I'm with you on that as well. Friday night, the Elks play their second straight home game, and Alouettes are on the road again. Let's go back to last year again. This is near the end of the season. The Montreal Alouettes are having a brutal time of it against Trey Ford and the Edmonton Elks in Edmonton, and suddenly a second quarter that goes crazy, a punt return touchdown, a sack that gets a fumble six. The Alouettes take over the game in the second quarter and go away winning. And I kind of thought at that moment that that's when the Alouettes proved that they are a team that had to be feared. If you can go into somebody else's stadium, fall behind early, and then take it to them, that's impressive.
Well, who didn't do that against Edmonton last year, though? We saw Winnipeg get down huge early in that game and march back and beat them, too. Edmonton's struggles at home were legendary last season. Again, this one, a 5.5 point spread seems pretty big as well, given what the Elks showed against the Rough Riders. Yes, they did collapse in the fourth quarter, didn't get the win, but I think this one's going to be closer than the 5.5 as well. So I'm taking the home team to beat the spread in this one.
The Elks come into this game. They have to sign Tevin Jones, a recent release of the Montreal Alouettes, because Kyron Moore is out for the season with an ACL. Edmonton's offense is a big question mark. And as much as McLeod Bethel-Thompson is a great quarterback, he makes mistakes every once in a while that you scratch your head. In the game against Saskatchewan, he tossed the ball backwards to a back that wasn't there. He fumbled the football having it stripped from his hand, and that's pocket awareness. Why isn't there more of it? He loves football. He is great at what he does, but there are just these moments that you go, what?
Yeah, it's McLeod Bethel Thompson. He's a stabilizing quarterback, but the mistakes do still happen. I agree with you. It's tough to see where the points are going to come from. I mean, they still have Geno Lewis as an offensive weapon as well. I just think it's going to be a bit closer than they're giving Edmonton credit for at this point.
I like the Alouettes on the road for this one. Montreal proved in Winnipeg that they can take on all comers. Edmonton has got to be reeling from what happened. They are on a bit of a shorter week to get prepared for this. Granted, they are at home, but the Alouettes will probably stay out west. Montreal is going into this game without Reggie Stubblefield, who, of course, had an incident with Chris Streveler of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, who gave him a little leg tug. Now Stubblefield tore up his ACL within 5 minutes of that, and so he's gone for the season. Montreal's defense, though, was fine, and thereafter they've got the horses to take care of business, and that's where I think the Elks will struggle. It's that Montreal defense that will create havoc for Edmonton. Montreal covering the 5.5, yes. Game 3 of the weekend at BC Place. The Lions with probably a sellout, 50,000+ people. 50 Cent is going to be there to open the festivities, and the Calgary Stampeders are the visitors. BC is 9.5-point favorites at home. Can you argue it?
These are some of the numbers that we saw with the Bombers at home last year, often huge favorites. Calgary played a really good game and beat Bo Levi Mitchell and the Hamilton Tiger Cats. You can't take that away. 9.5 is a big spread. That being said, what we saw from Vernon Adams, I do think the Lions bounce back in this one, and I mean, it's a touchdown and a field goal gives you a 10-point spread, right? I think that's a reasonable amount, and this one is going to be a bigger win. The Lions are going to pull this one off.
BC gave up 6 sacks against the Toronto Argonauts. You look over at Calgary, and you got James Vaughters staring you in the face. He's as good as Florent Ormolade with the Argonauts. That is going to be a huge problem for the BC Lions because, as I said before, if they're going to have any prayer of being in the Grey Cup, Vernon Adams Jr. has to be in one piece for that game. He took a beating in Toronto. He injured his throwing hand in Toronto. He'll be fine playing against Calgary, but they've got to define that offense a little bit differently so that Adams isn't at risk all the time carrying the football. I still like BC at home. Could have easily won that game against the Argonauts, and the Argonauts are no slouch. Stampeders on the road, unless Calgary has something really dynamic that is going to start working for them, but it just doesn't feel like all the pieces are there just yet. We finish in Hamilton on Sunday, where the Saskatchewan Roughriders are the visitors, taking on the Hamilton Tiger Cats. The Tiger Cats at home are 1.5-point favorites. Let's just remember something, and we've talked about this on the podcast before. Home teams usually get 3 points, and you think, well, oh, wait a minute, Hamilton's only got 1.5. Well, just think of it this way. At the start of the game, typically in most odds making, the game is 3-0 for the home team before anybody kicks the football off because that's the home field advantage. It's usually worth 3 points. So Hamilton's only getting half of that advantage to beat the Rough Riders. This is essentially a pick-'em football game.
It is, and it will be interesting to see. We saw Bo Levi Mitchell have a pretty solid game, not great against the Calgary Stampeders. He's getting a home start now with the Hamilton Tiger Cats against a Riders team that has to be feeling good after that fourth quarter comeback. I think I like the Riders for the upset in this one. From what we saw of those two teams, the Riders winning a second road game in a row would be a huge confidence boost for them, and I think they're going to pull this one off.
One of the hallmarks of Corey Mace's tenure, when he started talking about what he wanted from his team, was discipline. We didn't see a lot of that in Edmonton. Logan Ferland got thrown out of the football game for throwing a punch. Jaden Dahlke took an objectionable conduct call after a receiver was tackled and he started to yell at him. These are types of things that you're not going to win football games over the long haul if you keep taking really big penalties. I still like the Rough Riders, but this one does scare me because Hamilton is going to be better. Bo Levi Mitchell proved to me in Calgary that his throwing arm is all right. After all this time, all this rehab, he looked sharp throwing the football. It was his receiving core that let him down, not the other way around. At 1.5 points, this game could be a 1-point victory by the Tiger Cats for all we know. It should be fairly close. I do like Hamilton at home, but I think Saskatchewan might be just that much better, and I'm leaning towards the Rough Riders covering 1.5. That's a safety touch.
Speaking of safety touches, we saw the Bombers score one on a missed field goal.
That was the weird one. I still don't think they got the call right, but it was one of those things where they called it a safety on the field, and the booth couldn't figure out how we were going to overrule it because they don't have a camera down the line looking at this.
So do you not think it came out, or do you think he got forced back in?
You've got the returner coming out of the end zone without control. Yes, he did propel it out of the end zone, but he didn't have control of the football. And second part of the equation is, by rule, you have to bring the entire football out of the end zone. So where that line is where you score a touchdown is also, you have, with the point of the ball, you need to bring the whole football out of the end zone on that same line. I don't know that he got that far forward. The officials on the field made that call, and there was no angle to prove one way or the other that they got it right or got it wrong. It was a real tough one. But it is a rarity, but that's what makes the CFL great, right? Like, you'll never see that in the NFL. Well, you could, technically, but it would have to be a kick that was short.
Third Down Gamble uses the expert resources of the Canadian Football League and 3 Down Nation. For up-to-date, insightful statistics and analysis, please visit cfl.ca and 3downnation.com. The CFL on CBC theme music is used with written permission from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Thank you for listening to our show. Third Down Gamble is hosted on Podbean. Follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @ThirdDownGamble. Join us again next time. The Third Down Gamble podcast. Audio worth watching.